I'm going to call this regular meeting of the West Dallas West Milwaukee School Board to order. Mr. Sikich, could you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Suzette, can you please call roll?
Yes. Mr. Ustra.
Here. I can't hear you.
Mr. Keller.
Here.
Mrs. Carr. Here. Mr. Sikich.
present.
Mr. Burns.
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser. Here. Ms. Deal. Here. Mrs. Justin's excused. President Lee.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Are there any modifications to tonight's agenda?
No.
Okay. So now we're going to open up for public comments. As a reminder, everyone who has a public comment has 3 minutes to speak. Please state your name and address before you begin talking, and there will be no discussion or interaction with the board. This is just your opportunity to provide any comments you might like us to know, and the district will respond to you either at the next board meeting or privately, depending on what your comments are.
Can we remove our masks when we're speaking?
We would ask you to keep them on. John Malling?
Yes, that's me. My name is John Malling, 3850 South Pole Drive. I'm in the district in New Berlin that is in the West Dallas West Milwaukee School District. And I was going to start out by asking Marty Lexman if the West Dallas West Milwaukee School District is already teaching critical race theory or they're planning to do so. Well, I just wanted a yes or no answer, but I know you guys don't like to answer questions. Well, I'm telling you, you better listen to the distant thunder because there's a storm brewing. There's a revolution of parents and grandparents that are preparing to take back their schools and their curriculums, and it could be curriculums or curriculae. I've looked up the pronunciation. Critical race theory has no business anywhere near our schools. It's based on a Marxist philosophy, and I said Marxist. Marxism. Initially, Marxism pitted capitalists against the working class. They knew it wouldn't work in America because we kept too much freedom under our belt. So they changed it now from class to race. I have an article I'm going to give you from Imprimis in Hillsdale College. It says, critical race promotes 3 ideas. Racial antagonism, that sounds good. Collective white guilt or white privilege. And segregation. Basically, all white people are the problem of all of the problems we presently have in our system. White males especially are considered white supremacists. And I got to ask you, do I look like a white supremacist? What a pile of crap. I'm supposed to have white privilege. Let me give you my story of my life as a white privilege. My mom and dad had to work their entire lives to support us. I started a paper route in 5th grade, weekly. Every Sunday at 4:30 a.m. I got up to send out the journal. I worked my entire life starting from 15, every summer, every Easter, every Christmas break to make money to pay for my college. My mom and dad couldn't afford a nickel. I worked my ass off in high school. I got a diploma. I got money to go to college. My mom and dad didn't give me a nickel. I graduated magna cum laude without a dime of debt. And I did it because I worked my ass off, not because I'm white. I worked my ass off. I got where I did because of it. Martin Luther King must be rolling in his grave right now. He was a great man, and I think we all know it. And we're undoing everything he's done. Everything. We've gone backwards. And if you're teaching this stuff at school, it's good as spitting in his face. How dare you? How dare you? I admire the man, and so should you. When we talk about equity and equality, equity is the big word now, BS. Equity is
Mr.
giving...
Mulling, if you could wrap up your comments, your 3 minutes are up.
Okay, I'll be quick. Equity gives everyone the same stuff whether you deserved it or not. Equality gives you the opportunity to do whatever you want and get whatever you want according to the Declaration of the Independence. All men and women are created equal. They didn't use the word equity. It's time we start teaching the fundamentals in our school like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, reading, writing, and the mathematics, and not how to organize a protest march, for God's sakes. You better start listening because I'm hearing more thunder. And I hope you start listening to parents' demands because they're not going to ask anymore. They're going to demand. And I sure hope the hell you guys are going to listen. Thank you. I've got a copy of the employment article from Hillsdale, one for every one of you. And I'd like to put my comments in the, I want that in the notes and I want my talk in the notes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mulling. Robert Terrell? Robert Terrell?
Yes.
Oh, 1 second, Mr. Terrell.
Okay.
Mr. Malajchuk, would you please put on your mask, sir?
It's unconstitutional. You can go without his mask.
Thank you very much for complying.
Are you folks all
You don't have to
vaccinated?
wear a mask.
Are you folks all vaccinated?
Are you vaccinated? Are you all vaccinated?
Thank you.
Raise your hand. You're not.
They're not listening to you.
All right, Mr. Terrell, you can.
Okay, thank you. My name is Bob Terrell. I'm white with a human skin under my color. I'll be straight to the point. Why, as decent human beings, are you in favor of this critical race theory
Mr. Terrell,
propaganda?
I'm sorry to interrupt again. Could you please state your name and your address for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, need these anyway. Robert Terrell, 1500 South 92nd Street, Apartment 8, West Allis, Wisconsin, 53214.
Thank you.
Should I start again?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. My name is Bob Terrell. I'm white with a human skin under my color. I'll be straight to the point. Why, as decent human beings, are you in favor of this critical race theory propaganda? Look, every person on earth who isn't a racist knows that it's not the color of your skin that matters, it's the content of your character. So said that black man, Martin Luther King, who was the greatest leader of anti-racism on this planet. Critical race theory is Marxist propaganda that's meant to stir up trouble in our country. It's historical. If you can cause a major conflict of some kind in any peaceful country, then the radical socialists and the communists can much more easily take over. Why? It's because both the frightened common woman and the terrified man on the streets want to have a strong hand to take over the government in order to keep the peace. They don't want rioters burning their houses down, which goes for all races. Critical race theory is not an instrument for destroying racism. It is a Stalinist and a Hitler-esque technique for destroying democratic republics. You must eliminate this lie from this institution and its programs and never let it in. You do not want to be dupes of a criminal propagandist political movement that ultimately only wants to rule with an iron fist. Now, hey, pay attention. My best friend, whose name is Willie, he's a black man and a Christian minister. He has always been my closest friend ever, for almost 30 years now. We don't hate each other. And he's never on no account reminded me, his Christian brother, that racism is all this white man's fault. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Terrell. Chuck Kronowski. Mr. Kronowski, I ask you to keep your
My
mask on.
name is Chuck Kornowski. I live at 2158 South 90th Street in West Dallas. And I represent the West Dallas, West Milwaukee people, we the people. I'm on Facebook with Sheriff Clark. These face masks are unconstitutional. You do not have to wear your face mask.
You do when you're on
and
school district
you
property.
you follow the Constitution.
Mr.
You
Karnowski,
might
can
as
you
well
please
sit.
put on your face
You
mask?
might as well step down right now
If you're
and
not
give
gonna
up
put
your
on your
post
face mask, I'm gonna
right
have to ask
now.
you to leave.
And I will ask you all to step down because you're not following the Constitution. All of you, you're not following the Constitution. You work for us.
Mr. Kanowski, can you please put on your
You know
face
what?
mask?
You listen to me.
I will
You
when
listen
put
to
on your
me
face
and you
mask.
listen to the people of West Dallas, West Milwaukee.
It is the
Because
school
we're
board
coming after
policy to
you.
wear a face
And
mask
you,
on
if you
school
don't
district
follow our
property, and I need
direction,
you to put on your face mask.
you know what, sir? You wouldn't answer if you answer us if you had your vaccination. You would not answer us. You could be passing all your immunities or inimmunities to the people of West Dallas. This is unconstitutional. We had a burn your mask rally with Sheriff David Clark just recently. You do not have to wear a mask. You drank the Kool-Aid, all of you. You drank the Kool-Aid.
Thank you, Mr. Karnowski.
Thank you, and we're coming after you. You don't want to step down now? Fine. You better step down. You can resign right now. Because you know what?
Thank you, Mr.
We could
Karnowski.
get a bunch of bobbleheads
Mr. Karnowski, thank
with
you.
with the teachers union on it. We don't need you. We can have bobbleheads up there and say with the teachers union and have them bobble. Because that's what you are, bobbleheads. Thank you.
Mr. Karnowski, if you're not going to put your mask on, I need to ask you to leave.
Call the police.
I will.
Go ahead.
We have to wear them over our nose.
Yes, mouth and nose.
They aren't. Those two at the end are. So I think that kind of relieves us, doesn't it? Because they're not wearing theirs right.
At this point, we'll pause the meeting until Mr. Karnowski either is able to put his mask on properly or is removed by the police.
It's unconstitutional.
Right.
You step down, not following the Constitution. You're bobbleheads, all of you.
Steve Broadwell?
Bobbleheads.
It's too bad Marty's not here tonight because my visit was prompted by his April 20th letter of this year in response to the joke.
Mr. Broadwell? Can you please state your name
Steve
and-
Broadwell, I live in New Berlin, 12965 West Ohio Court. I gotta take this off, I can't breathe. In response to the George Floyd death.
Mr. Broadwell, everyone is underneath the same rules here.
They
one
don't
has-
have them over their nose.
Who doesn't have them over their nose?
These two.
Unconstitutional.
Bill, pull it up.
Just keep speaking, sir.
Please put on your mask, sir.
You realize how ridiculous this is? Especially considering if you all got your vaccines. Okay, anyway, too bad he decided not to show up tonight. This is my first visit to a school board, and prompted by his April 20th letter. My daughters went to Hale, and I'm here, as are these other folks, because of my concern of critical race theory being introduced throughout the country to our young with its focus on race. Your letter, Mr. Lexman, who's not here, talked of hopelessness, helplessness, anger, and fear. Certainly many people felt at least some of those emotions, especially considering the reaction to Mr. Floyd's death. From Marxist organizations like BLM, founded by 3 Marxists, I'm sure you all know that, right? And Antifa burning and destroying parts of many of our cities. Fanning the flames of these emotions are people like Ibram X. Kendi, who you saw, Mr. Lexman, who's not here, who you saw fit to quote in your letter. Kendi judges everyone and everything based on race and continues to pick at the scab of racism. His writings and statements are juxtaposed to Martin Luther King's famous quote in which he implores us to judge a man not by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. Why not focus on somebody like him instead of Ibram Kendi and other black leaders, of which there are many, that have positive messages and would provide a more uniting response to events like these. No, Mr. Lexman, instead you choose to use this terrible event to launch this district's CRT program. Never let a crisis go to waste, right? You did not use CRT-specific nomenclature in your letter, but instead used CRT linchpin terms like equity and social justice standards, terms which were repeated ad nauseum in the candidate forums prior to the election. It seemed at times as though it was more of an interview for a social worker's position than candidates for the school board. It's not real clear how far down the CRT rabbit hole you've gone so far, but it is definitely here. It's very obvious. Kendi is a divisive figure who, if not a card-carrying Marxist, is one with very strong proclivities in that direction. Proof of that, considering his goal to eliminate racism, is his comment that racism and capitalism are conjoined twins, and the only way to truly eliminate racism is to eliminate capitalism. Makes one think he might have another agenda. This is who you, Mr. Lexman, who's not here, choose to hold up as inspiration. Other Kendi comments. The use of standardized tests to measure intelligence and aptitude is one of the most racist policies ever devised to degrade black people. This statement and the anti-racist policies and practices Kendi pushes would be considered what Ian Rowe, maybe you know him, a black intellectual and Fordham trustee, insists are soft bigotry of low expectations. This can have terrible unintended consequences, such as one example cited by journalist Natalie Wexler about a young black boy who wanted to be a lawyer. However, after being introduced to CRT concepts, he told his mother, "Mom, there are these systems that prevent black people from accomplishing anything." Fact is, lots of white kids don't do well on those tests either. Many factors other than race contribute to success or failure of an individual, but not according to Kendi. Another one, when talking about Amy Coney Barrett, our newest Supreme Court member, some white colonizers adopted black children and civilized these savage children, the superior ways of white people, using them as props in their lifelong picture of denial while cutting the biological parents of these children out of a picture of humanity. What nonsense. And this is who he puts in his letter. Kendi and CRT claim there's systematic racism in the country. If so, how do you explain very successful black men and women attaining very high and influential positions in this country like Barack Obama and Clarence Thomas, not to mention influential thought leaders like Thomas Sowell?
Mr. Bridwell, your 3 minutes is up. Can you please wrap up
Okay.
your comments?
Okay, well, your statement, Mr. Lexman, who's not here, that for our black and broken families who fear that this will be one more time where justice will not be served, does nothing to uplift and give home, but is very divisive. You said that our schools need to be anti-racist. Does that mean that up to this point, under your leadership, this has not been the case? Just a couple more sentences. While the George Floyd death was an awful thing to watch, these incidents are far more isolated and random than the media and the left wants to characterize them as. Therefore, perplexing as to why they would drive a school agenda or focus. You know, I'll have to visit you folks a few more times because I've probably got about 12 minutes here. So we'll see you next meeting.
Thank you very much. Joe Mikolajczyk.
My name is Joe Mikolajczyk. Address is 3355 South Russell Court, New Berlin. First off, I'm talking on another subject, but this critical race theory is ridiculous, and this equity stuff is ridiculous. It is going to come back and bite you in the butt, almost guaranteed. Now I would again like to tell you about some of my views on the 2021-22 proposed budget and tax levy. Student enrollments have been decreasing for a number of reasons. One reason is because you didn't have school open. Yet every year, the school district budget increases. Something's wrong with that. I would also suggest members Sikich, Ustrick, and Justum pay particularly close attention to all the comments made here tonight. Enrollments are declining. The budget should not increase. I have a suggestion that will certainly save millions of dollars. Discontinue using the teachers union controlled WEA trust program for health insurance. After Act 10 was passed, many school districts have kicked the WEA trust to the side, and they have saved over $3.2 billion. That's billion with a B. I want to submit as part of the record an article describing how the Kenosha Board of Education recently saved approximately $20 million yearly booting the WEA trust. I want this put in the record, please. Why has the school board continued to use the WEA trust for health insurance? I think I can answer that question. It's because this school board and administration is a bunch of teachers union lackeys. Let me repeat that. Teachers union lackeys. In summation, I would like to say no budget increases, no tax levy increases. I'd also suggest you not try to confuse taxpayers by telling them that the mill rate is decreasing when the tax levy is increasing because property values are increasing. That's not going to work too long. No proposed referendums for increased spending or backhanded tricks that were played when the last referendum failed. Mr. Lexman knows about that. I would suggest you start putting the citizens, taxpayers, and students ahead of your buddies in the teachers union. Do you have any questions for me? I didn't think so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maklajczyk. Looks like we have one person on Zoom. That wraps up the in-person public comments. So if there's anyone else who is watching Zoom right now who would like to make a comment, please post in the comments or the chat that you would like to make a public comment. So right now we have Leah Zacharias. Can't hear.
3rd Street, 53227. I'm speaking to request that you remove the district mask mandate and allow masks to be optional. I keep hearing that you're following the science, and I want to know what science. Show us peer-reviewed scientific studies. What data shows that masks are still necessary? State and city mask mandates have ended, and there have been 4 cases reported in West Allis, West Milwaukee last week. 4 new cases, that is. School districts that have ended the mask mandate weeks ago never had a major outbreak. Please look at the surrounding school districts' data. Waukesha School District, of 14,000 students, ended their mask mandate May 12th. There were 6 cases the day that the masks were removed, and there's now 1 case and 0 close contacts. The vaccine is available to all staff and students 12 years and up. The virus has never been a threat to children under the age of 12. What data and science are keeping the mask mandate in place? My kids can go everywhere without masks, except school. You're elected to represent the students and community members. I ask that you do what's in their best interest for the students' social, emotional well-being, as it is also what's in the best interest of their health. Remove the mask mandate for the 2021-2022 school year. Thank you.
Thank you. As I do not see any other posts in the chat, and see no one else in person who would like to give comments, I'm going to close public comments at this time, and we're going to move on to item 7, the superintendent's report.
Good evening, thank you. And again, Marty apologizes for not being here this evening as he is out ill. So the first line item on the superintendent's report is an update on our return to school plan, which we do not have any new information to report on our return to school plan at this time, as school has been completed. We do have lots of things going on for summer school at the present moment, but we'll have more to report on that in the next couple of weeks as we start to see what our enrollments look like for summer school. Next is the legislative update from the state legislators. The state now expects $4.4 billion more in tax collections. According to the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, the state is expected to take in $4.4 billion more through mid-2023 than was anticipated just 4 months ago. This means lawmakers will have nearly $3.8 billion more in the 21-23 budget than they anticipated. That is even after the state transfers more than $800 million of the additional revenue growth to Wisconsin's Rainy Day Fund. The Legislative Fiscal Bureau now projects that the state will finish the current fiscal year, June 30th, with a surplus of $2.6 billion, $816.1 million more than previously estimated. Governor Tony Evers today called Republicans' proposed state investment in K-12 education paltry and said vetoing the entire document is on the table unless they add more money. Evers proposed $1.5 billion in general purpose revenue with another $41.7 million in program revenue and segregated funds. The Joint Finance Committee approved a $128 million in addition general purpose revenue for K-12 schools while adding another $22 million in other state funds. They also approved transferring $350 million in GPR to the Budget Stabilization Fund, arguing it could be used for educational purposes down the road, though lawmakers acknowledged it could also go to other expenses as well. The U.S. Department of Education has warned that the K-12 package proposed under the Joint Finance Committee would not meet the maintenance of effort requirements to qualify for the federal stimulus money under the COVID-19 packages. And there are no federal legislative updates at this time. So we'll move on to district recognitions, and we have lots of exciting things to share this evening. From our entire district, this year students from West Allis Central, West Allis Nathan Hale, Dockey Project-Based Learning High School, and Shared Journeys earned a combined total of $2.9 million in scholarships. We congratulate the class of 2021 and wish to recognize these top students. From West Allis Central High School, the valedictorian was Alyssa Matthews, the salutatorian, Melody Swift. The top 10 students included Alyssa, Melody, Dominique Mauher, Malik Suleiman, Jenilyn Rugsy, Samantha Engel, Desiderio Lopez, Benjamin Page, Laurel Thompson, and Savannah Hike. At Nathan Hale High School, the valedictorian was Joshua Truchon, salutatorian Lucas Krajewski, and including those two in the top 10 with Katrina St. Clair, Patrick Kirkpatrick III, Emma Seafeld, Natalie Gumya, Brendan Compass, Amelia Bader, Sydney Schoten, and Killian Peterson. Note, Patrick and Emma have the exact same GPA in there, so they are actually a tie for for number 4. Under Communications and Community Relations, special thanks to Principal Matt Lesser, Assistant Facilities Manager Tim Detloff, and the technician Brandon Schumich, and our custodial staff for going above and beyond and planning and assistance with our outdoor graduation ceremony. Also a huge nod to Beth Kaler, who has been living out at the athletic complex for about a week now, getting everything prepared for the ceremonies, including wishing away the rain. So we want to give Beth a big shout out for her work and getting us ready for graduation. In our Leadership and Learning Department, the Wisconsin RTI Center recognized school programs, celebrated school progress in expanding, refining, and sustaining implementation of both positive behavior intervention systems and response to intervention. This year, Franklin Elementary School was recognized with the Bronze Level Award. At Nathan Hale High School, senior Josh Truchon has run the fastest 3,200 meter race on Wisconsin soil. He set a new record for 8 minutes and 44 seconds for the 3,200 meter. In Recreation and Community Services, we would like to thank the West Allis Central Black Student Union for their generous support and partnership. Together with the BSU, we are bringing the Kotai Dance Company to our community for a free workshop on Wednesday, June 30th, 2021. And at West Allis Central, John Riddell placed 3rd, a bronze medal finish in the Power Equipment Technology Competition at the Skills USA statewide competition. John had to take online tests, submit a resume, and put together a video showing his skills by doing a virtual engine tune-up for the judges. And that concludes our district recognitions tonight. And we have no other updates and information item at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Raymer. I will move on to the board president's report. We'll start by going over the board calendar. So today, on June 14th, we have a regular Board of Education meeting, followed immediately by a workshop on the proposed 21-22 budget and preliminary tax levy number 2. On June 21st at 6 p.m., we have a board workshop with consultant Melissa Matarazzo from Huron Consulting Group. On June 28th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting talking with action on proposed 21-22 budget and preliminary tax levy. On July 12th, we have at 6 p.m. we have a regular Board of Education meeting. On Monday, July 19th at 6 p.m. we have a board workshop meeting. The first one that will be going through the fact team findings, so a very important one there. And then Monday, July 26th at 6 p.m. we have another regular Board of Education meeting. So now we'll move on to item 8.2, which is the board committee reports. We'll start with communication, community relations. Ms. Kaiser.
Nothing really to report. Last meeting we have introduced Amy to the team and what to expect, and looking forward to our next meeting and getting stuff done.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to the employee engagement and culture. Mr. Keller.
All right, ours is a shorter report as well. Currently, we're working with building admin to fill all of our open positions to get us all staffed up. We're also working with building admin to finalize and roll over educator effectiveness, and working on communication and video discussing our newly approved compensation model.
Great. Anyone have any questions about that? Okay. Do any board members have any community events they would like to talk about? Mr. Sikich.
Mr. President, this is not necessarily a community thing, but I just wanted to pass along to members of the community the loss of 2 former West Allis, West Milwaukee teachers. Mary Nowak, who was at Central for a long time, passed away, and Dick Menken, who was a football coach at West Milwaukee and wrestling coach, and over a 30-year teacher in the district, and also was very instrumental with the powerlifting and the bodybuilding at Wisconsin State Fair, passed away down in Florida.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Our condolences to their families both. Kristen, I think was asked.
I was going to say it was an honor for the first time getting to hand out diplomas at Hale. It was a lovely day. The sun mostly stayed away, and very well put together. Beth obviously runs a tight ship, and it shows, and it was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Amy?
I just want to say, say thank you to the FLW and Next Gen community for inviting us to their tiny house open house. It was phenomenal. The kids were given a budget. They had to design their own tiny home. They had to incorporate green elements to it. So it was a really fun experience, and it was really enjoyable.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? I do want to comment on the 2 graduations I was able to participate in for Daki and for Central. It was a great time. I think everyone was really happy to be able to have an in-person graduation, and I will say that the confetti cannon certainly added something to the ceremony that we were dealing with, so I thought that was great too as well. All right, with that, we'll move on to our consent agenda. Item 9.1 is our approval of minutes. Items 9.2 is our employment summary, and items 9.3 is our supplementary contracts. Does anyone need any of this separated out? If not, I look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. And we'll move on to our action items. Our first action item is item 10.1, WIAA Senior High Membership Renewal Application for the 21-22 school year. And Ms. Strasser will be telling us about that. I believe she's on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Leon. Mr. Marion from West Allis Central is here with us as well via Zoom, and Mr. Lucas is at a playoff game, so unable to make it. But we're just here tonight to ask the board's approval to renew our applications with the WIAA to participate. This is a requirement of the WIAA that the board approves both the Nathan Hale application and the West Allis Central application by August. So we're here to seek approval to just renew our annual memberships with them.
Any questions? Otherwise, I look for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Move in second. Any further discussion? If If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that carries. Thank you very much. On to item 10.2, science materials adoption, grades 6 through 12. Mr. Hengel.
All right. Good evening. Let's try this one. Maybe not. Two? Try two. That was a 75% chance. All right. Thanks for having us back. We'll make that a little bit bigger. Got kind of small. We had workshop about 3 weeks ago for our science resource adoption. Incredibly proud of the members of that committee. Like I know Deidre's explained in many of our adoptions, Steve will talk about in his, we merely guide the process. The teachers are really leading the discussion and going through and digging into the resources, as that's kind of been our way that we've been handling those situations over the last 5 years, because I will never teach out of the science book, so I feel that I shouldn't choose it. So in our conversations, they, were asking excellent questions, making sure that everything that we were going to adopt or we were going to look at was representative of all of our strategic planning, our equity beliefs, our deeper learning, or equity through deeper learning. So all of those pieces, using those as touch points for looking at our resources. With the kind of adaptable nature of where we live today, they decided on a lot of open source I would say resources, because they're adaptable, they change all the time, and they're updated all the time. So I kind of provided some just like 30,000 square foot or 30,000 foot views of where we landed. So our Gizmos, which is an online lab simulation, we actually purchased that out of the pandemic this year. Teachers loved it. This was probably the #1 request. We bought it at the high school level this year, and we'll continue to move that into the middle school levels. Defined Learning is a project-based learning management tool. So you can see our cost there of about $100,000 for a 6-year contract. That's with a 30% discount we were able to negotiate. I was just on the phone with them on Friday. Our 6-8 Science is looking at Open SciEd, which also provides professional development. And there's like a nationwide conference that we're looking at having some people to go through for 2 to 3 days in July. And then, as you heard from the members of our little committee, and the feedback from you guys as well, that we're really wanting to get that hands-on piece that has sometimes been missing in the last few years. We want to bring that back to our science pieces. So they're busy. They've got their all proposals for their little learning kits that they want to put together, and even some things like microscopes and dissection materials, and having that hands-on science piece really come back into that middle school. Biology, AP Biology has been using CK12 for the past couple years, and then also purchasing some CK12 professional development, curriculum writing time, which is with all of our pieces, new microscopes, lab materials, chemistry, lab materials, physics. One of our texts, as you guys probably remember, AP texts, in order to get that little designation in the course catalog, they have to be within 10 years. Our AP text is 10 years old this year, so we'll have to purchase a new text for that. And then Anatomy and Physiology 1 and 2. Anatomy and Physiology 2 is a new course. It was approved 2 years ago, but we never ran it, just due to low enrollment. And so, but they're using an open source text. It's the same one that they use in Anatomy 1, but then also having some curriculum writing time, as it's a new course, having some lab materials, getting those important dissection pieces in Anatomy and Physiology. And then Agriculture is also a new course, approved 2 years ago, but it did not run this past year. Supporting them with a text, just a class set of texts, and then some lab materials, I believe, which is in the form of the word's escaping me right now. What do we have at Docu with the fish? Aquaponics lab. I keep wanting to say horticulture. No budget in there for a cow right now, or any chickens or anything like that yet. So you can kind of see our total there for our 612 resources. Yes, Jane, question.
You mentioned something about a conference. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that would entail?
Sure. So there's an Open SciEd conference in July that we've had a few teachers. Actually, these guys are waiting with bated breath for me to send them an email tonight that we were good to go. And they're already meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. to get started on putting some things together. So there's a conference, just because it's more of an open source textbook, it's a little bit new for us. We want to provide some professional development. And they have individual coaching sessions that you can, purchase obviously for a cost. But it was about, I think it's $1,000 a person for a 3-day virtual conference of like, here's how they develop the units, here's how you can use them, tailoring them to what you need. So our goal is to have at least one member from each school, so from West, FLW, and Lane, to attend that.
And the cost for that would be, say that again?
It was $1,000 a person for 3 days, virtual. Yes.
When we spoke in May 17th on this, I think the initial budget was a little less than what we're hearing tonight. Is this, I want to know if I can't see if Caitlin's here, there's a beam, but
She's over there.
is this still feasible within our budget that we'd already planned and discussed back in May?
Yes. Well, short answer, yes. Long answer is we have to, if we have things like professional development. So most of these things we're purchasing this fiscal year with, when we talk about our budget reallocation, most of these items are purchasing this fiscal year. Things that have to happen each year, like professional development, that expense has to hit that budget. So those are the items that we're working through with Leadership and Learning and getting in Leadership and Learning's budget so that can be supported each year. So yes, short answer is yes, it is supported in budget.
And is $1,000 a person for professional development normal for virtual?
Yeah,
that's kind of insane to me.
That's probably a little bit on the lesser end. That's usually cheaper. Usually conferences, if you're attending in person, are going to be about $1,000 plus you have all the travel costs of getting someone there. So it's pretty reasonable. And usually, typically, professional development that we would hire, where if we would have like a one-on-one implementation coach, is usually about $250 to $500 an hour, online, not even in person.
Okay.
Some of the increase in the costs, as Caitlin and I were talking about, is like the Defined Learning 6-year contract. Is we were able to get another $15,000 to $20,000 off if we were willing to sign a longer contract. So instead of it being about 40, I think the original quote was like 50,000 for 3 years. We were able to negotiate a better deal for the longer term.
Okay.
Any other
All right.
questions? Related to the online costs, so these are 1-year costs, 3-year costs, and we talked about if, how long and how long we could get. Usually you buy multiple years, you get a better deal.
Yeah.
So our, for all the online resources, we're looking.
That's the 3-year cost.
For all 3 years.
So so this is, what does that work out to be, about $13,500 per year we pay per site license. So with having Dockey, Hale, we have 6 site licenses, so that's about $2,500 a site license is how they go that. And then same thing with Defined Learning, they charge you for a site license. So if we see increase or decrease in enrollment, that doesn't really matter. Whereas there are things like Alex or we'll talk about in the tech plan with Cami, that's a per user site. So Deidre knows, as I try to be fiscally responsible, I negotiate those every year. So we look at, as we've had declining enrollment, we're not paying for an extra 400 seats. I call them and say, hey, last year we had 8,100 students. This year we have 7,800. Please adjust our contract to reflect, 300 less users. And typically when we do that, at sometimes $20 a user, it saves us $6,000, $7,000, which obviously, we can put right back into the classroom.
And some of the costs are heavier this year around some of the consumables less consumables because they are more equipment driven. We have some of our science programs that are using microscopes or materials that really aren't functional anymore, or they're borrowing materials from other schools and having all of the proper equipment in place at each of the schools is a one-time investment for now until, you use those for quite some time before they wear out again and you replace them. The curriculum writing in this one, especially given the fact that we're going with some op-ed resources, is a lot heavier for this first summer. And then that curriculum writing gets written into our leadership and learning budget every summer, because every summer those documents need tweaking. The one thing we couldn't buy up in advance were some of the consumables for science. It's a bad idea to try to store dissection materials for 6 years. That's not advisable. So those are some of those things that we'll just have to build into our annual budget for replacement for those teams.
I was gonna ask that. I wanted to make sure that we would have that as a line item
Yep.
moving forward, so that we weren't, in
Yep.
situations where you have kids that are missing
Yeah.
things and you can't.
Yep.
do what you need to.
Yeah, I haven't taught biology for about 14 years, but it looks like the shelf life for a dissectable material is about 4 to 5 years. So, working on that.
Yeah. So there
But
was a
many
few
of
things.
the, as many of you know, I taught physics at Hale, and in having conversations with the physics teacher at Hale and the physics teacher at Central, I went over by Dan's classroom, which used to be my old classroom, and it's everything that I had purchased 11 years ago. So it's the same sensors that, again, 5 out of 10 of them might work, and so we're looking to kind of replace that and just, start fresh with the newest pieces for our kids.
For the microscopes, do we have a company that comes in and
We do.
services those?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yes, we do. And obviously that's dependent on what the breakage rate is. They usually have every other year. We have a company that comes out and fixes the microscopes, and I want to say off the top of my head, it's about $3,000 to $4,000 for each school every time they come out. So that's replacing stage clips, cleaning oculars, all that kind of pieces.
We can talk offline, but that's usually done annually, regardless of breakage, to prevent breakage.
As a preventive, sure.
And so I have
Sure.
some experience with that we
Sure.
can talk offline about.
Perfect.
Any other questions about this adoption? If not, I would look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't even know if I want to leave.
We will move on to, if I can scroll up here. Item 10.3, the social studies materials adoption, grades 6 through 12. Mr. Carr.
Well, thanks for having me back again. As we talked about several weeks ago, our team in the social studies adoption broke up into the high school and in the intermediate levels. The intermediate level team had spent a considerable amount of time looking at several different resources and settled on, as we discussed a couple weeks ago, TCI is going to be the resource that we feel most comfortable using. Those who harken back to that conversation 3 weeks ago, the initial price that they quoted us is considerably more than what is currently in this adoption, which worked out well after talking with our representative from TCI. She was able to kind of bring things back together, and we're using online resources rather than hard copy text to send home with kids. Makes it a much more malleable, useful tool should we have another situation where we have a snow day and we've got to send a kid, it's going to be at home with them. So that was it was nice to have them come and meet us at a price that was going to be cost effective for us. At the high school level, we have some outdated text, no doubt about it. That team put their heads together, came to the understanding that the U.S. Government text was going to be, it was as good as the other one, and it just was, it was very old. So we just want to update the resource we use. We also wanted to purchase online text, similar reason as before. It's just a much more useful, more flexible resource for kids to use. So came to that price point that's in the executive summary. Our economics text is outdated, but they still are looking at some of the resources that they would like to consider. So rather than push something forward that we weren't 100% confident with, we're going to continue to look at some of the resources we might want to use with economics. Having said that, Adam's price and my price, when you put them together, pretty good. It wasn't intentionally that way, but it works out. So, and then, but I'm hoping that you guys can see fit to get us moving forward. The TCI resource is going to be a considerable change for our teachers to utilize, and the professional development. They are also eager to get started with the professional development that makes them most familiar with the online resources and utilization of pushing that out into the students. So if we can get this going, I can get the professional development started with our teacher team. So,
Question about this adoption, Kristen?
Very happy to see the cost came down. Just wanna say.
it's not really my doing, but I was happy to accept it. So.
Own it.
Any other questions? Mr. Cart, just one thing. I know during the workshop we talked about TCI was one that was being looked at, as well as choices, and in the executive summary mentions TCI is the main one. How many components from choices was it decided to pick, and do you know like roughly what they were about?
There was one particular teacher who's a real advocate for the choices program.
Okay.
It was, and there was no. He really likes the concept of the program. He's already resourced himself through. It's not going to be a matter of. He's okay with not purchasing choices at all.
Oh.
So he's going to just. We're going to use. He's comfortable using TCI, and then resourcing with the sources that he's already using. So.
Okay.
So
so
the choices is not part of the purchase.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. That wasn't exactly clear. All right. Any other questions? If not, I would take a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
So moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item 10.4, the crossing guard service proposal approval for 21 to 24. Mr. Norris.
Good evening, everyone. It'll be just myself tonight, even though Mr. Hamrick is listed. But thank you for having me. I wanted to discuss with you item 10.4, crossing guard approval process. So to give you a little background, I know you have it in front of you, but just for some context, last summer the police department notified the school district that they would no longer be budgeting for the crossing guard allocation in their budget, and then moving into the 21-22 school year, that would be the responsibility of the school district. So I had spoken with Caitlin about that last fall, and so we initially did an internal analysis to see if it was potentially possible that, given our current staffing allocation, if we could staff that and manage that on our, given the staffing that we have. And so through the internal analysis, we thought, looking at our current staff, the times that the staff would need to be at the stops and the proximity to their location where they're staffed at, it was nearly impossible to do that, and that was just to make it logistically work. And then when you factor in other items such as the insurance to insure something like that, the ability and the cost to train and provide the professional development, not to mention, which I'll get into in a minute, the cost to have backups in place, and then equipment, we thought that it would actually cost the district more to do that itself. So given that analysis, we looked at moving into an RFP process to get bids from local agencies. To do that, what we did is we contacted other area school districts in proximity to us, in local size, to develop a list of agencies to get some feedback on who they might be contracting for services with. And so we used that list to begin an RFP process. What we did find is that a lot of local school districts either use All City Management Services itself, or the police department does the crossing guard services for the community. So what we did find, which I thought was reassuring, is that the school districts in local proximity and size who have this need are using this agency. So that was good news. When we finished the RFP process, we only received this one RFP, which is from All City Management. The good news is that we are currently using them. This is who the police department contracted with. They had great scores. We contacted references like Shorewood, Tosta, City of Waukesha, Wausau, Sun Prairie districts of similar size and proximity, and all of them were very pleased with the services. If you look at the cost increases, the one thing I'll note is that the 5.3% increase, almost all of that increase goes to the employees. That is due to a $1 increase in the salary for the crossing guards. I felt more comfortable with that in communication with the agency, All City Management. Their response was that, we need to try to get employees, and we need to make sure this is staffed. It's one of the things in our organization that I think people forget about a lot, but they can't go unstaffed. That would be a disaster waiting to happen. So that was a good thing. And the last thing I'd mention is that Mr. Shore, contract attorney lawyer, did review the contract. They had some rebuttal and discussion of contract language in the contract prior to it being in front of you tonight.
All right. Any questions on this piece? If not, I would look at a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. No further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Move on to item 10.5, approval of additional open enrollment seats for the 21-22 school year. Mr. Norris and Ms. Windler, but maybe just Mr. Norris.
I'm back up. The second item I wanted to go over is, for many of you, this is an annual item that we go through and discuss. For me, how I look at this is it's a good discussion to have, because it means we're consistently and constantly reviewing our enrollment and responding to the needs of the families who are applying into the district while being referenced to where we're at with how many students are currently enrolled versus how many students we're expecting with projected enrollment. So the two things that I wanted to discuss tonight, and on the front page of your agenda at the bottom, and as you can see, is looking at in-person additional seats for open enrollment for next school year. So in-person, I want to highlight regular education in-person students. So the number there is 68. Now, how that number came to be is, the first thing is nearly half of that, 31, is in 4K. So at this point, we would expect to see about 2/3 of our projected enrollment with 4K. And right now, we're at about 150 of 400 students, 400 being the projected enrollment for 4K next year. So we're a little, we're below where we should be. The 31 represents the 31 students on the waiting list for 4K. So we have 31 students that applied for open enrollment who did not get accepted. And so given our current enrollment at 4K, I feel like it's appropriate that we would at least look to move to approve those students for regular education in-person seats. The remainder of the students on this list are going to be that same calculation up to the 92 percentile with students where there are waiting list students in grades. So where you see a 0 in first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, we have open seats. We don't have a waiting list. So should a family come in and need a seat, if they are regular education, we could look to approve them because we have open seats. Other grades that we do not. In 12th grade, we have no open seats. Those 6 students are students who are currently, or prior to school ending, were current students attending, had moved out of the district, and are calling, asking to come back for their senior year. And so I looked at our senior numbers. We absolutely can make room for 6 students, and so that makes up the 68. So that's the first piece. The second page is, I'm sure there's been discussion on the virtual school, and so when I met with the directors on open enrollment seats in person, I also discussed, similar to what Wauwatosa does, would it be appropriate to open up seats for virtual school students only? I have received a number of emails from families who are on the waiting list, specifically asking, hey, we just want to go to the virtual school. Is that a possibility? And I said, can you hold on for a week? And they're very, as long as we've been engaging with them, they're very understanding. But that represents 10 students per grade. The 10 I came up with is that it's hard to know what grades a lot of the families we might get interest in. And so that's where we came up with 140. It's very unlikely we'll fill even half of that, but I would hate for us to have 5 per grade and then a 6th, 9th grader would apply, and then we might be back here again. So that's where we came up with 140. And I guess that's that.
All right. Anyone any questions about the open enrollment seats?
Just one note, under the recommendation, it says approve 38 additional seats.
I did
but then
see
the
that.
breakdown actually totals 68.
Yeah.
So
That's a error. That's an error. I'll fix that. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I noticed that while I was speaking, and I was like, oh, the one thing I had to get right, you know. Sorry about that. Yeah.
No worries.
Any other questions? Jane?
So Aaron, we talk about how kids coming into the district or kids enrolling out of the district, we usually like to balance that.
Mm-hmm.
Are we finding that we are in balance so far? Have kids opted to come back compared to coming out, and where are we with that? Like,
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's one thing that I think we would all agree is something that as a district we'd like to see that balance come back to light. I think, you know, if I had to go off my memory, we have about 750-ish students that open enroll in, and we're just over either high 1200s or low 1300s out. To answer your question for next year, it's hard to know where we're at with that because non-resident districts, meaning where students are leaving to, don't have to report if those students intend to attend or do intend until the third Friday count.
Okay.
So at this point, it's unknown. But I can tell you with the virtual school, one of the things I've been working with Leadership and Learning, specifically Deidre and Caitlin on, is in Opal, which is the DPI portal, where we report who's open enrolled to us and leaving, because there's an exchange of funds, ultimately, right? What I've been doing is I filtered on any district that does offer virtual school, and I've been able to try to isolate that into removing seniors, right? Because we don't have next year data, down to 300 families and students. So a school services department is fielding and making phone calls to those families, essentially letting them know, like, you may be a family who is attending a non-resident district for purposes of virtual learning, and that's something we offer. And so I've made about 50 phone calls myself. I have gotten a ton of really positive feedback. Not always like, we're gonna come and enroll, but it's like one family kind of responded to me with like, this is the right thing to do. She had said that she'd heard about it, and her neighbors had asked about it. And so to me, it was like, this conversation precedes you. It's gonna go beyond you. And so even if those families don't come back, you know, you don't really know who's gonna walk in the door because of that conversation. So I think that outreach is something that I would like to do across all students, not just the 300 virtual students.
and I would encourage that.
Yeah.
I feel like we have some time here, and that we need to do our due diligence to get those kids back in our district. So, it feels unbalanced to me, and I think we need to do something about that.
Yeah. One of the things that is a bit of a surprise, I'd say, is that of the 1,300, I believe it's just under 800 families are enrolled in Milwaukee Public Schools. And, you know, in some of the outreach that I know that I have done, but specifically that precedes me, you know, with Beth and Jeff Borland, is that a lot of those families, the reality is a chunk of them, I don't know to what degree, are families who moved here but had their kids in a K-8 or things like that. And so I think and that's where we see the increase in 6th grade and in 9th grade. It's some of those families coming to us when it makes sense for them. So while I agree completely with you that we should be reaching out, and that's something that we have started doing, I think that we'll see some of that continue, but yeah.
And in a really exciting update that we didn't get the news in time for our board update this week, we did get the charter school grant. So we were fully funded for that one. So thanks to the many, many hours that Adam and I were able to put in on that one and do some of the revisions. And so that part of what we allocated funds for in the grant was to be able to do some radio and TV advertisement for families to know that we have a virtual option. And so we are hoping that that helps in our promotion efforts to let families know that that is an available option to them to open enroll to us, which is where the extra seats also became important tonight, to make sure that if we do advertise that families can come here for that we have seats to offer them.
Other questions? Aaron, do we have any numbers on current enrollees for the virtual school yet, or have we not allowed that because we haven't officially opened it, or where
Yeah,
are you with that?
at this point, I can speak to the open house that we had. So I know we were, correct me if I'm wrong, Deidre, but I think it's around 100 families were interested. And so, how many of that translates into enrollment will be a good question. I think a lot of things depend on how things go in the summer, but I mean, to have 100 families initially is really positive, I feel like.
Do we know if those are current families?
Those are the current families that we had said that we were offering that option to. And so those are 100 families that likely would have open enrolled to someone else who's offering a virtual option should we not have done the work to get the virtual charter open. And so Ryan Johnson, who's going to be overseeing he's going to be the principal part-time at the virtual charter. He is working right now with Aaron and with our technology department on enrollments and how do we handle some of those pieces so that we can get a firm number so that we can start hiring the teachers and start getting those pieces going so that the virtual school can be fully ready to go in the fall. And especially since quite a bit of the grant funding is tied to professional development and planning that we intend to do in the summer. Now that we know we have those funds available to use, it'll allow us just to increase our efforts in that area to make sure we're ready to go.
So I was asking about the seats just because, so they're currently our students in our district.
Yeah.
So if they shift over to virtual, are they going to be taking a virtual seat, or is that going to open up a seat in our in-person school?
It would. If we had, for any family that shifts over from like at a seat at Central to the virtual school, it wouldn't necessarily open up an open enrollment seat unless we came back and had this discussion again, which is what I intend to do, because I think that projections are just projections until we start getting butts in seats, until we start having those actual numbers of actual enrollments, and we start seeing, oh, Franklin is low, we can add in this. Then it's like you start looking at this again, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at with the virtual school. It's like we need to have the seats open, that way when it starts to be, school's going to be in 5 weeks and families start to have this, where am I going to go next year? It's like then they show up and we don't have seats open, they go to the next community. That's kind of that's my opinion of what happens, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The goal is to just take some more measured steps when it comes to those things and be monitoring it more closely throughout the summer. So we didn't historically used to come back for more open enrollment seats, and Aaron's doing a great job at just watching that enrollment and saying, hey, this is be practically where we could pick up some of those seats so that we're not staffing classrooms that aren't full in the fall. And so it'll help us manage budget and all of those pieces as well.
Any other questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
I'll second.
We have a move and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Norris.
All right, thank you.
I'll move on to item 10.6, the technology plan approval 21 to 24. Mr. Hengel.
There's my notebook. I have a paper copy. I got really excited waiting in my copy machine this morning because I haven't done that in like a year and a half. Sorry, Jeff, I just had the notification that you were trying to get into the science plan. But sometimes it's better to have a paper copy so you can take some notes on.
Thank you.
I'll leave one for Heather.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
For Heather. Okay, don't just turn right to the last page on the budget.
To it.
Everybody gets all excited about that part. Okay, so technology plan, round 2. So, I sent this out with the stuff on Friday in the packet. So this is kind of like our whole kind of plan where we have our goals together and things like that. So just some overview pieces on page, there's some background information on page 4 of where we've been. This has just been kind of updated since our last technology plan to include decisions that we made in 2017. And, now we're 9 years into an iPad, Chromebook, and other district purchase instructional devices. So we did some updates there. Put in the new strategic plan, as that was, again, one of our guiding documents for our tech plan. We wanted to make sure, obviously, we're hitting two major columns, the success in life and college and career readiness, and then the financial stability and efficiency as well. So updated that. On page 7, again, a huge thanks to all of the people who put in hours on the committee and, had great conversations, talked about where we're having successes, where we're having opportunities for growth. So thank you again to those people that are listed there. And then kind of some goals when we looked at it, that success in college and career readiness. These are very similar to what we had before. And some of our goals it's like a yes, no. Like, do we have a learning management system or do we not have a learning management system? And some of the pieces are where we'll send out year-end surveys to get some data back. As it seems like so long when you say it's a 3-year tech plan, but really 2 years from now, we already start writing the next one. So also one of our goals is to make sure that we're getting employee feedback. As you know, that's ultra important to us. It hits into our other category of our strategic plan. So just a couple highlights. In our first goals around the integration of academic and career exploration and using our model for graduate profile. That's new from our last tech plan. The last tech plan was centered around academic and career plan, but this idea of having increasing a digital portfolio and a digital presence for our students. So when they are leaving us in 12th grade and heading into whatever their post-high school experience may be, we want them to have some sort of like a digital tool. That's our goal, have a digital tool that shows that progress towards a graduate profile. And that fits right in our strategic plan. So that was an update. On page, the goals for effective teaching using digital tools, just this idea, we're going to provide that professional development. We want this to be something that is not like a really nice coaster. We want the tools to be used effectively. So we provide that professional development. A number of those opportunities come from our own staff. We have some great, not only innovation coaches, deeper learning coaches, principals, but teacher leaders as well. We have a number of teachers who are out there earning Apple certifications, who are earning Google certifications, and coming up with just great things. As I know that Deidre has talked a lot about how we run our workshops for professional development, where we're highlighting people that are showing equity through deeper learning, and we're visiting those classrooms on those professional development days, hopefully in person in the fall. So having that on there, and on page 10, these are kind of like our equitable access to information resources and technology. These are kind of the ones that are like, we either have them or we don't. Having digital media tools, they're either present or they're absent. So that's an easy one for us to give feedback for you guys on. Is our goal is in a board update at least once a year to kind of be providing those statistics for you guys of like, yes, we have a learning management system. Yes, we are providing digital tools. These are the digital tools, as that was important to us as a committee to keep you guys informed, but also from your feedback to make sure that you guys are having that information as we're making decisions moving forward as well. No other real changes. Like I said, on goal number 4 on page 11, starting that new tech plan in the summer of 2023, which doesn't seem very far away. And then also, per suggestion last week, having that quarterly and quarterly breakage rates reported out to the board in a board update as well. We are still working on that for the end of the year right now. I sent out a survey to all of our innovation coaches post our last meeting, and I heard back from about half of our schools. And right now, as they were just collecting devices last week, many of them were looking through them today, figuring out what those breakage rates are, and I would say 6 of the 7 schools responded that 0 to 10% of their devices were like, may need a deep cleaning or may need like a screen replacement. So I would say that's probably right on par where we would have expected, having those devices been home for almost a year and a half. And so, but again, those have to be checked like one device at a time. So for Central, who's accepting 1,000 devices back, and Hale's getting 1,300 devices back, that will take a little bit of time. But most of the elementary schools said that they're about 0 to 5, 0 to 10% of breakage, and that could just be a screen breakage, or it could be something shoved into the charging port as well. So we want to make sure that a quarterly report to the board on what breakage looks like for those devices also included in the plan. That was an update as well. So on page 12, our recommendations, which we kind of went over last time, balancing that leases with outright purchases. I'll scroll up here so that way people at home are. Okay, so balancing leases with outright purchases. Caitlin and I have talked many times with Bruce and Frone and Kevin in technology about what is the balance. Obviously, we're not going to lease speakers for classrooms, but what does a Chromebook lease look like? Would it be advantageous for us to use the appropriate funding in a 3-year lease versus a 4-year lease? Things like that. Obviously, we want to, so in instances where it seems feasible and appropriate, we want to reduce our lease costs and reduce those interest payments, so it might look like a shorter lease. Investing in those iPad cases, which we know came out of the last tech plan, which was that was huge, as we saw 1 to 2% breakage versus 10 to 15% breakage 6 years ago. And then also that idea of not replacing the whole fleet at one time. So not saying okay, let's just take, we've talked about in the workshop we have a number of iPad 5s that are coming kind of out of their useful life that need to be replaced, but we also have some 6s that have at least another year in them. Bruce just found out that the update for the operating system will be on the 6s for this September. So we should be able to get another year out of those. But then, so we're not taking all of our devices and replacing them all at one shot, because forecasting of what does that look like in 2027, and making sure that we're able to plan appropriately for that. And balancing devices, obviously, across multiple schools and different grade levels. So tiering those devices to prevent the need for large-scale device refreshes in the future, and then reselling our old technology, having that obviously be, like we talked about, the resale value right now is very high. So we're seeing hopefully a good buyback portion for us that we can put towards other things, right? Yeah, okay. And then also, we kind of have our district needs assessment results there, looking at that. The big thing for us pushing down those iPad 6s, where we have about 800 of them. And obviously, that'll, depending on what those grade levels are of where they'll kind of end up. But pushing those devices down to that 4K first grade level, continue to support multiple platforms to ensure that the district technology is being used intentionally, and then respecting the voice of staff. And then, like we talked about, our recommendation is the Chromebooks there's about 700 Chromebooks that are going out of service, and allowing those devices to be able to be taken home for students that may not have a device at home. That way, they're not taking a device back and forth. And having an estimate of, let's say, if 500 of those devices go home across the number of the high schools and intermediates, we would still have 200 left that we can use to support classrooms as well. But then they're not traveling with them back and forth, which obviously increases an opportunity for breakage. And just some follow-ups as well. We did send out a survey to 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade about whether a device would be appropriate to go home or not. And we got responses from, I think it was 57 teachers. And about 80% of them said that they would not need a device to go home for 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade. With a number of also open comments of, I think especially after this year, a lot of people felt it was really important to give the kids a break from technology, play with your friends, play outside, get that fresh air. And I think that was great for our staff to be able to have input on that, and then also to have that commentary of, you know, like we talked about with ELA, we've got a number of books that kids are available. So like, let's send a hard copy book with the kid home and have them read out of that text and engage with those books and get the smell of a good book and all that goes with that, rather than, you know, being on an iPad and, you know, using Dreambox at home or something like that.
So is that the plan then, to not have devices going home with any?
That was our recommendation. Okay. And then using those devices, so the Chromebooks that'll go out of service, they're not of huge value to us, but being able to use them for kids if they did need a device to be at home, and we'll, you know, pending approval, we'll create a new contract and bring that forward and talk about, you know, what that looks like as well, as we'll update, we'll need to update all of our forms and everything too. All right, any questions on that part before we get to the last page? Okay, perfect. All right, so our last page, kind of budgeting out just per year over the course of the 3 years of what that looks like. So I'll start on the left column. So this would be our Apple lease costs for 3,500 8th generation devices, and then that also includes 220 Apple TV replacements at the elementary level. As we talked about, a lot of those are 11 years old. They haven't been able to be serviced since 2017, and they drop out, and that just, I mean, when you have a device that's 11 years old. So that's our lease payment right there for those 3,500 devices. That's a 3-year lease. That also includes no Apple Care, as we talked about that. You know, Apple Care is $50 an iPad for 3-year coverage. That covers breakage on screens, battery life, broken cables, broken power cords. But again, as we kind of have reported and technology, like, we're just not getting those things back. So it would not cover an insurance claim if we're not getting the charging block back. It's just if, like, the charging block is missing one prong. But again, that's you know, that's our recommendation, is to not have that.
Adam, can I
yeah.
ask so, we're talking about leases and things, and I am new to the board, but during the pandemic, we had to purchase some extra technology, like the owls and all of
Yep.
those things. Did we lease those? What will we be using those for in the future? Is there any innovative way we can think of to continue that use?
Yep.
Or can you talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
so
that?
like the owl cams, we purchased those outright.
Okay.
And we've talked about using those for admin, as you know, like we have people who drive all over the place and are spending time in their cars, but us having administrative meetings, our usual Thursday meetings, where people can just zoom in and we can put the owl cam in there and then have people be in the space as well. We've talked about continuing to use them in some of CTE departments, as that's where some of them ended up now, and some of those laboratory pieces, shifting them over to virtual as well. So that would be a decreased cost for virtual school, although now that we have the grant, that's a little bit of a different dynamic. But yes, continuing to still have those available for staff to check out.
Okay.
You know, there won't be any virtual kids in the space, you know, because we wouldn't be having the two options, but there still can be used for recording labs and things like that as well.
Okay.
So yes, we do own those outright.
Okay.
And for the most part, the ones that we purchased last year are being put to very good use by our staff, with an increase in the number of people using those for student projects and reporting out on those throughout the year. So none of what we purchased last year will be sitting on a shelf without being used going forward.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, so still in 21-22, again, this was that absolute max number for projector replacement at the elementary and secondary level. Again, the idea that, you know, we might have a projector that's not what we call our standard, but it might have 1,000 lamp life hours on it. We're not just going to tear that down and throw it away. We're going to use that until it's no longer usable, and then replace it with with our standard. And so this would be the absolute max that would be. We might never come close to that number, but we kind of wanted to put that max amount out there that would be carried out over the life of the plan. Again, using those pieces to the fullest extent that we can get out of them. The keyboards for iPads, again, we use those for technology classes. They use them for state testing. That's a one-time cost. We would own those. That's why it's the $40,000 one-time purchase and then zero in the other two. That's for just taking, they're about $50 a piece, taking the number of elementary students that we have, multiplying it by a quarter, because we already own about a quarter. So if we have 4,000 elementary students, we'd have about 2,000 keyboards available. Some of those are in plastic bins. We ship them back and forth to schools. If they're like, oh, the whole school needs a keyboard for their iPad, okay, I'll send mine over and then you send yours over next week. So there's a lot of sharing there as well, which obviously increases something from sitting on the shelf. And then moving down to our Chromebook. So that's a total cost. We have to get a lease prepared, but that would be a total outright cost if we were to replace those 700 Chromebooks that are going out of service. And then if you look right over to the next one, that's our largest fleet of 3,111 Chromebooks that will be going out of service. Those, again, still will have some residual value. We'll still use some of those for devices to sign out if a student needs a device at home next year. But I would imagine that we would be able to sell a large number of those back and be able to have that buyback money applied to whatever Caitlin decides. She knows how to do all that stuff. She's great at it. Yeah.
It says lease to be prepared. So
yes.
Are we going to lease them or are we going to buy them?
We're going to lease them, but that's the current cost of what they are right now. We're not sure if there's a cost increase next year.
So that's the lease cost?
Yes.
Okay.
And then our digital access tools, that's Cami and Zoom. That'll probably be a little bit high as we're able to get some Zoom cheaper pricing through CISA 2 and negotiate some contracts. We won't have to have as high level of Zoom next year, but a lot of, like we discussed, a lot of families like that option for conferences and things as such. Speakers, we talked about that. That's, again, a one-time purchase to make sure that those are available for all classrooms. Locked storage carts, again, a one-time purchase. We're replacing the ones that are like, you can just see it behind that pole over there, the big, huge metal ones. It's a little bit, those weigh about 100 pounds just without any Chromebooks in them. But replacing those, there's about 20 left in the district. That's, again, a one-time purchase. And then our pieces down at the bottom, looking at some project management pieces, as we talked about. We'll be busy teaching micro-credential classes, and so having some extra help in order to remove asset tags and collect all the devices and remove covers and things like that. As we have a number of projects in technology and in leadership and learning to manage over the course of the summer. And then the contracted work for installations was, again, a number that we wanted to make sure that we have in the budget. So if you think about if an outlet needs to be installed somewhere for a projector, or if something needs to be moved, where we're contracting that out, if we can't use our own, obviously, district staff. But there's some instances, where you have a different throw on a projector, so the outlet needs to be moved over like 4 feet. We'd put in a work order through our own department, and then if that wasn't able to be covered, we wanted to build in a budget for that as well. I think that's pretty much it. For me, at least. Anybody have any questions?
I have a few questions.
Yes.
So we mentioned about surveying staff for tech use at each school. Is that something that we're going to start doing on an annual basis, on a semi-annual basis? What are we You know, because we didn't really have that information for this tech plan.
Yep.
And I don't want that to be the case moving forward, because I really think we did that for our last tech plan. That's how we landed on what we used. That's why, you know, Lane has
Yep.
iPads and FLW, and West do not. And so, what is the plan for that moving forward, so that we make sure that we are getting, before we go to these leases and this large amount of money to get devices, that I want to be sure that the schools still want / need for what they want to teach, because the staff turnover that we might have, the teaching styles, the new things that come out every year might change drastically what they want to use. And then I want to have, well, we bought all these iPads, but you know, actually now we want Chromebooks, because that's what we need to use.
Yep. We do, actually, now that, as I'm looking at that, in our recommendations, we do have number 5, respect the voice of district staff when choosing future devices. But I think it might be more, I thought I had a goal, an objective in here, and how to assess was sending out a survey. But I think it might be more appropriate to put in goal number 2 on page 9. District will provide access to technology resources and digital platforms in an online learning environment that is 24/7 accessible. Survey of teachers evaluating usage of platforms and probably like devices. Add that in there.
Okay. And that's going to be done on what regularity?
Yeah, so you're looking for like how often, right?
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
So
So,
we can get a feeling
so-
for it and know, like,
yeah.
oh, okay, this is where things are moving, so
Yeah.
we're making the next tech plan. We've already done this work, we know where we gotta go.
So, my thought on that is if we survey annually, we might expect, there might be an expectation that there's change. So if we send out a survey next year and it's like, oh, we want to get rid of iPads, let's just say Lane, we want to get rid of iPads and go to Chromebooks, there might be an expectation then that we're going to follow through on that.
Okay.
So I would say if we put that in, you know, we have a goal on starting our next tech plan this summer of 2023. I think then that may be some language around sending out a survey in spring of 2023, so we have that data moving forward.
Okay.
Okay.
That's
I
fine.
will add that in there, and then when we have to vote, I'll.
I just wanna make sure we're
Yep.
checking in. We did that before. And
Yep.
Yep.
I think it's important we don't buy stuff that people don't want to use or don't like to use because the previous staff did for whatever reason.
Yep.
Correct.
And the survey last time actually altered quite a bit, which schools got what. And so certainly that's important to do as, you know, technology has certainly evolved and our use of it has evolved, especially with this last year.
Exactly. So Chromebook cases, I asked about that last time, especially with the ones that we might be checking out for kids who don't have devices at home. Is there any, I don't see a spot in here for Chromebook cases. Is that something that we found to be not needed at all?
Bruce actually has a Chromebook case sample.
Oh, wonderful.
So in our FAQ, there is the Chromebook cases. Is this the one that's 28?
23, I think? 23 or 28?
I see 28. So
$28, yeah.
So $28 a case. That is something that if we are having a device go home, that might be something that we could add into the budget for those devices.
Very, very sturdy.
Mhm.
Anyone else want to see the Chromebook case? Okay, so that's not currently in the budget. You say you would have to add it in?
Yes.
Okay. $20 a piece. Now, you mentioned that, you know, there's the 700 going out of service this year, and there's 3,100 going out of service next year. I presume those are two different model numbers?
Yes, correct.
So any ones that we kept over from this year, we would presumably replace with some amount of the newer
Correct.
ones the next year?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
And then-
obviously, trying to, you know, sell back as many as we can, as that has a, you know, does have a little bit of a residual value for us. It doesn't have a residual value when you're trading in like 50, but it sure does when you trade in 3,100.
So do we have any idea of the number that we would keep back for the purpose of being able to give to students who needed them?
I think that would probably be responsive to what we see this year of people wanting to check out a device to stay at home. And then we would be able to allocate that for the following year.
So is the plan to keep the entire 700 this year for that purpose? Or only
I
a
would
certain
say
amount?
we would see how many people would want to check one out. And if we do have the opportunity to sell some of those 700 back, we certainly would do that. Like if we get 200 requests, we could sell back 500.
Okay, and so that's happening this fall, that's not happening this summer?
Yes, that would happen in the fall.
Okay.
There's a little piece of, we're having kids use devices for summer school as well. So we've got devices that are being used in that, so we can't like close out and sell back right away. So we have to be a little bit mindful of that as well.
Okay.
But yes, we would not want to have like 500 devices just collecting dust where they're out of service, and we could sell those for parts and.
Right, I just didn't know
Yeah.
if you had like a ballpark number of how many you think you would, because we're going from 700 to 3,100, obviously we have
Yeah.
all of those.
Yes,
but
yes.
I didn't know if you had an idea, so,
Yeah.
okay, so that's good. I mean, the last thing, the question about high school one-to-one, so that was brought up during the workshop about moving high school to one-to-one. But in the description, I didn't really see that. I saw carts being purchased for high school. Has that one-to-one plan changed? Or are we moving to only having carts in departments?
That's what our model is now. That is, when we talked to the committee, they were like, yes, could we use another cart? Yes, that could be some of the 700 that could be used for that purpose and putting a 30 allocation in another department. But in the surveys or in the group that I had for secondary, they were not like, oh, we need one-to-one, carry them around every day, go home. They were more concerned with them not coming back charged, again, on the going home piece. And when we looked at, in the workshop, we actually have more devices than our one-to-one, but with the common school purchases, and that's where it just gets a little bit tricky. Like Hale has, I think that Hale has like 1,400, almost 1,500 devices with only 1,300 students.
Right.
So having more devices in there we didn't feel was necessarily fiscally responsible. But just being, like Deidre had mentioned, allocating where if you're gonna say, there's kids that are using ALEKS in math class, not having 9 algebra classes that are all gonna be doing ALEKS scheduled at the same time, sometimes, and then that helps alleviate some of the pieces of needing a lot of Chromebooks, because what happens is you usually end up needing them for 1 or 2 hours, and then they're sitting dormant for 6 or 7 hours.
The goal is to have the one-to-one technology accessible in the school, but maybe not necessarily checked out to one student at a time and checked back in at the end of the day, just that we have enough devices that at any given point in the day, every single student within the building could be on one, and that would be okay. So in all essence, it's one-to-one, but different than this year where we said, you get one, you get one, everybody takes them home and back to school. That's kind of just a different approach to getting access to the technology.
So the common school funds was the problem last time. This would not be being purchased?
Yes, this is straight
Okay.
ESSER. Yeah, straight ESSER, so we wouldn't, and that was a lot of the conversation that we had in our committee, is when we're looking at the number of devices that are in Destiny, and we're saying, Hale, you actually have 1,550 devices, and yet there's only 1,250 kids. I don't know that Hale off the top of my head, but it's how the devices were purchased and how they have to be allocated, and, you can check them out for 2 weeks, and then you got to bring them back, and so we're trying to avoid, that was one of our main goals, was to just avoid that. And as you remember, that was 2017, where we had to make some difficult choices, and that was the choice that we made in order to best serve our students' needs, is we wanted to get those things out of Fund 10 and into a little bit more of a creative solution. So eliminating that. A lot of those devices are the ones that will be out of service next year, will be a lot of the common school funds purchases, because that was 5 years ago.
Okay, and then it would still fit to use those with people, with students
Yep.
that need to check them out,
Yep.
that would still fall
Yep.
within the rules?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, that's all the questions that I had. Anyone else have any questions that maybe my questions stirred up? No? All right, well, if not, then have a promotion.
I do have that, just the one language change of, so on page 9,
Yep.
It would be survey of teachers evaluating usage of online platforms and devices. And then how to determine success would be the percentage of teachers increases using online platforms. And then it would be survey to be sent out in the determine success. Survey to be sent out in spring of 2023 to all teachers and administrators. You can just add that right here.
Okay. Anything else, Adam?
I'm good, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, back to entertaining a motion.
Move to approve with discussed changes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes.
All right.
Thank you. That was much more streamlined.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the work on this. I know it's a lot.
No problem, thank
It's
you.
important. So, all right. We will then move on to item 10.7, individual contract extension of administrators and at-will employees, which is Ms. Raymer.
Yep. And so this is an annual item that comes to our board each year. This is for the approval of the contract extension to administrators. So our administrators are on a 2-year rolling contract, but yet we issue a contract each year. Typically, this comes to the board a few weeks earlier than this, but as we had some administrative changes that were happening, we wanted to make sure those were all completed before we go forward. The at-will employees are the employees who are with us on an employment agreement from year to year. And so our deeper learning coaches are on an at-will contract or an at-will employment agreement, as well as some of the office staff that we have here in our support staff within the building. And so this just gives us permission to go ahead and extend contracts to those individuals.
Anyone have any questions on that? If not, I'd look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Then moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes.
Okay.
All right, so that concludes our regular meeting. We're going to take a 5-minute recess before we start our workshop. So we are in recess. All right.
There was one, there wasn't one last year.
Thank you, everyone.
But they are doing one this year.
Yeah, we used to get invited
Freedom.
to March, Christmas.
Just want to bring us back into order here for the beginning of our workshop. The board will convene, no, that's not it. So Caitlin, item 12.1, proposed 21-22 budget and preliminary tax levy number 2.
All right, good evening. So we are talking through next year's budget at this point. So this is a preliminary budget. And each year we approve a preliminary budget for the next year before that year starts. So our fiscal year starts on July 1. And again, just a prelim budget because in October is when we approve our final budget. So everything, not everything, a lot of the factors we'll see tonight will change, and that is just what happens with the preliminary budget. So we'll talk through assumptions, projections, and again, those words just insinuate that things could change. So we'll talk through what next year looks like tonight. But before we do that, just a first quick congratulations to all of our seniors who graduated over the last few days. We had luckily great weather and just an incredibly odd year. So congrats to all of our seniors. So our agenda for tonight, we'll review our budget assumptions. So again, when we don't have all of the info, we have to make assumptions in order to have something to project. So we proceed with assumptions during our preliminary budget. We'll review the state budget updates, and there are a lot and hardly any at the same time. Preliminary budget scenarios and options for next year, and then mill rate projections, along with recommendations and then discussion for our preliminary budget approval, which will take place at our next regularly scheduled board meeting, which is June 24th. So starting with our assumptions. So we kind of broke these out this time into 2 different groups, starting with our revenue factors, and both of these are dictated by the state budget. So neither of which we know right now, we are currently assuming. We are assuming a $0 increase in our revenue limit per pupil. So there's 2 different per pupils we talk about. One is inside the revenue limit, one is outside. That one outside we call per pupil categorical aid. This one we're calling revenue limit per pupil, revenue limit per pupil. And we're using a $0 increase in the revenue limit per pupil. We're also using no increase for our special ed reimbursement rate. And both of those were items that the governor's budget, before it went to the Joint Finance Committee, had increases in, which we assumed wouldn't last. So the Joint Finance Committee, we're hearing discussions that they're saying no increases right now. So we've changed those assumptions to include no increases in both of those revenue factors. And then on the expense side, we have a few assumptions made, a bunch of assumptions made as well. So the first one that's listed here is 8.5% health insurance increase. So with our negotiated contract, we were able to have a rate cap for the first time in many years. So we have a rate cap for next year and the following year, and that's on a calendar year. So the rate cap for next year is 8.5%, and it could come in lower, but that means it can't go higher than 8.5%, which is good because at this point last year, we were using an assumption of 20% increase based on our loss ratios. So 8.5, that's a huge swing when we're talking health insurance, especially because it's such a large bucket of expense for us. So the 8.5% is what we're using at this point just because it's our cap, and we can hope that it comes in lower. And we find that renewal out, that rate increase renewal in summer, late summer. So as the budget moves forward, we'll have that nailed down at some point soon as well. We also have factored into this budget a 1.23% CPI increase for all returning staff, and then also fully funding the implementation of our newly approved teacher compensation model. So our board has prioritized teacher compensation and staff compensation, which we've heard over and over throughout the recent months and years. So we are prioritizing that within this budget, fully funding that. So that means for next year, the $200 annual increase, and then the retroactive micro-credentials. So if you can think of the timeline, throughout the next year, 21-22, is when teachers will be taking those micro-credentials. So this summer and then throughout the year that they're taking them for the first time. And then the next year, 22-23, is when they'll receive that compensation for those. However, we have some people who already did micro-credential courses, and a few of those do count. And so going into 21-22 is the year that those retroactive micro-credentials will be compensated once those individuals complete the necessary follow-up and the reflection. So that is budgeted into our assumptions for next year as well. We also have an annual item, $325,000 is what goes from Fund 10 to Fund 46 each year. So essentially it's a Fund 10 expense, and that funds our turf field replacement plan, which is in Fund 46. And that's an annual item per our schedule to stay on track with redoing the turf fields at the complex. And the turf fields are fully funded now for the 22 replacement, and this would be part of the next cycle. But that $325,000 is included to stay on track for the next cycle of the replacement plan. And the preliminary budget also includes an open enrollment out expense increase of $1 million from the current year, 2021. So, and that's essentially trend. So we see each year that open enrollment out expense increases approximately about $1 million each year. And so that's why that $1 million increase is included going from this year into next year. And then finally on this slide, we have school budgets at 75% allocation. So we have an internal formula that basically is a per pupil along with a free and reduced lunch factor percentage. And we have that kind of calculates then our school building budgets. And the last few years we've had to make some choices there in order to balance our budget. So moving into next year, currently in the preliminary budget, we have a 75% allocation rather than that full 100% allocation. So it's important to remember, I have this slide every year, that the budget is very much in flux at this point in the year. It's like Jell-O. Lots of things can change. However, this year, especially when we go into a new state biennial budget, so it's always the odd years. The big state works on the 21-23 budget, then they'll work on the 23-25 budget, where we have a lot of unknown factors that are really a big deal in our budget. So they could mean significant changes for us if they go from one thing to the next. So we'll talk through what some of those factors that we currently have budgeted, if they changed, what it could look like for us. But before we do that, we'll talk about what's going on with the state budget. So bottom line, it's just politics. It's a lot of politics going on right now. The budget is currently with the Joint Finance Committee. So the Joint Finance Committee is the first step in editing the bill. They basically took the governor's proposed budget and just threw it away and started from scratch in terms of school funding and those revenue factors that we talked through. So they're currently editing the bill, and honestly, daily we're getting updates about, oh, we're hearing this, we're hearing this, we're hearing this. And that's like a real life picture of what I look like every day when I read those emails, because they truly do like fluctuate, and honestly right now it really doesn't mean much. I mean, it does in grand scheme of things, I suppose, because it's a recommendation, but ultimately it goes through many iterations until the budget is finally approved by the governor towards the end of summer, even into September. So we're getting those updates daily, and I'll give a brief kind of high level of what we're hearing now, which again is just what we heard through today. So the Joint Finance Committee is apparently supposed to be wrapping up their conversations by Thursday. And what we originally heard from Evers' original budget that went to the Joint Finance Committee was that there was $1.5 billion dedicated to school districts. In the current budget that the Joint Finance Committee is talking through, they're dedicating just 10% of that to school districts. So that's a significant shift from what the governor started with, which we kind of expected, which is why we were conservative from the beginning. And we were budgeting a $50 increase in per pupil, and right now the Joint Finance Committee says 0. So even more conservative than we initially thought we should be. Let's see what else. We heard earlier in the legislative update that the Joint Finance Committee plans to set aside $350 million into a new budget stabilization fund that they say is for education. However, we've also agreed that there's nothing holding them to utilizing that for education, so legislators could change what that's for. Nothing holds them to that factor. And then another huge factor that we just learned in the last few days is that in the 21-23 biennium, we're hearing that there's projected to be $4.4 billion with a B more dollars in revenue than we anticipated originally. So the hope is that those dollars, or some of them at least, go back into education, and the state would still be in a good place. Okay, so with those, we'll move into our budget scenarios, and they're in a very manageable place for next year. So historically, we've proceeded with a deficit preliminary budget at this point, and then throughout the summer and early fall, we work to balance our budget and then have thus approved a balanced budget in October, many years dating back. So we'll work through the same process this year and then open up to recommendations before we close tonight. So currently, our worst case scenario is with the assumptions that we talked through. So with the $0 increase in the per pupil within the revenue limit, and with $0 increase in the special ed reimbursement rate. So where that puts us right now is about a deficit of $1,074,000. So basically our expenses are more than our revenue by about $1 million, a little over $1 million. Those are that's what we assume to be our worst case scenario. So with all those factors that we did super conservative, now that we're hearing Joint Finance Committee's discussions, this is where we're at. But there are many factors that could change. So let's talk through what some of these could mean for our budget. So if instead of a $0 increase in the per pupil within the revenue limit, we get a $150 increase, that could mean $350,000 more in revenue for us. If our health insurance increase comes back at 5% instead of the 8.5%, that could be $200,000 less in expenses than our current worst case scenario budget. Or if our open enrollment out expense increase, if the increase in that open enrollment out expense is less than $1 million like we budgeted from our current 2021 expense, I just put $100,000. That's a question mark because it's completely unknown. But what we're working through right now, which Aaron talked through earlier, is our virtual charter school enrollment, which is kind of step one in reducing that open enrollment out expense. And as you mentioned, he's making phone calls and getting some positive feedback from families about, oh, I've heard about it, which is, I mean, super cool. Like we've heard, oh, this is great to know, but then the, oh, I've heard about this before made us feel like, okay, so this has got some momentum going. And each student that then comes back into our school district, instead of open enrolling out comes back, that's $8,100 approximately that we save per student. So if all three of these things happened, which again, any number of them could happen, or in any different amount, say open enrollment expense increase, the open enrollment expense increased $200,000 less than the $1 million that we budgeted, that would be a $200,000 savings in that area. If all three of these happened and the dollar amounts presented, that'd be about $650,000 that our deficit would be reduced by, which puts us at what we're calling our best case scenario. So our best case scenario, the revenue in this example and the expenses just increased or decreased by the numbers that we saw on the previous slide. which ultimately puts us at a deficit of about $424,000. So in summary, we're calling this our deficit range of best case scenario $400,000 to a worst case scenario of about $1.1 million that we have to essentially balance by October, which is not unmanageable. And we've made some decisions in recent years that allows us to balance the budget without making, really without affecting students at all. It's kind of like when we talk about balancing a budget, what least impacts students? What's the farthest away from students? So we have some options. The first one is, and this is why we talk through our assumptions, so you know some of those big things that are in our budget as expenses or as revenues. Removing the $325,000 transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 46. And the benefit here is that we are currently a few years ahead of schedule. So that schedule for replacing the turf fields, we're a few years ahead of it. So not budgeting that $325,000 expense or that transfer from Fund 10 or General Fund to Fund 46 doesn't hurt immediately, but at some point we'd have to build that back in. The next option is utilizing Fund 38 fund balance to cover our difference. So we have $3.8 million. We made a large transfer in 18-19, so we had a good year financially in 18-19, and our board made the decision to make a large transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 38. And what that did was allow us to have some room for years in which basically we had a tough budget year, but ultimately we were kind of thinking long term when our declining enrollment either stabilized or started going the other direction, because that's when we were going to see a change in our revenue limit. So, which we're seeing this year, because last year we had so many, our enrollment declined at a greater rate, which gave us more revenue, if you remember some of those conversations from last year. But the next thing I wanted to show is this little graph about why does this help our general fund, Fund 10. So utilizing Fund 38's fund balance. So each fund, we work in different funds. Each fund has its own fund balance. Generally, we talk about Fund 10's fund balance as like the fund balance. So we have this $3.8 million in Fund 38's fund balance. And the reason why that could help our Fund 10 budget is that when we take our total revenue limit, that's the tax levy that's from the revenue limit, the very first thing we have to subtract out is the Fund 38 debt payments. So if our Fund 38 debt payments are less, because we can use the fund balance that's in Fund 38, then our Fund 10 tax levy is higher. So that means just more revenue goes into Fund 10 because less has to go to Fund 38 because we utilize that fund balance in Fund 38. So those, plain and simple, are the two options that I would recommend moving forward with in terms of balancing our budget for next year. And both of them are pretty painless in the short term. There's another option, which is kind of what we're hearing, not ideal, but sort of what the Joint Finance Committee is suggesting. We're hearing that schools don't need additional funding because they have these ESSER or federal funds to utilize. However, we also know that it is not necessarily responsible for us to utilize one-time dollars, so federal funding, this one-time federal funding for ongoing operational expenses. But what we could do if we decided we needed to, we have $250,000 in regular ongoing cleaning supplies. So we could take that portion of our budget and instead dedicate it to ESSER, but then when ESSER runs out, we have to figure out how do we fund those cleaning supplies again in our regular budget. So something we could do, but not ideal, because these are one-time funds. Go ahead, North.
So are those cleaning supplies the normal that we'd be getting, not the additional ones that we got for COVID?
Exactly, normal. Okay, so talking long-term planning, we can figure this out in the short term. This year it's relatively painless, but we do need to plan for the long term. So we have a number of strategies that we've already employed, and I'll talk through some of those now, and we'll also have another workshop with sometime during the fiscal year of 21-22, so our upcoming fiscal year, to talk long-term financial planning, because we always talk like the next year, but we have to talk big picture, long-term, in order to set us up in a good position for years to come. But some of these factors that we're already doing, the first one, which we've talked through a number of times tonight, is our virtual charter school. So as we are aware, our open enrollment out expense is one of our largest buckets that kind of continues to grow, and we're trying to change that and swing it the other way. So we've talked about the phone calls and such that we're making. Just have to give a shout out to Aaron Norris and Mike Thrun. They, on the operational side of things, are pretty much ready to go in terms of our charter school. So there's been a lot of things we had to do in Skyward. They built a new entity in Skyward. The enrollment process has been now, it is created, so that's just about ready to be deployed. And then Deidre and her team are working on the instructional side to continue to create that instructional programming that really sets us apart in the charter school from the others that exist in terms of that deeper learning framework. We also talk about our long-range facility planning. So this isn't a strategy that necessarily helps us next year or the next year, or even 5 years from now, but this is really a 10, 15, 20-year plan that addresses needs long-term. So we do know that we operate more space than we need. We also know that aging buildings cost more over time. So similar to an aging car, your car gets older and older, and it needs year after year more and more and more money into it to keep it going like it used to. So a building works very similarly, and I appreciate Steve Eichmann for that analogy because it kind of made everything make sense to me because I'm not a building expert. But those CIP needs are what will continue to go up and up each year, similar to an aging car. And we've done a really good job at managing our facilities over time, and even our architects and construction management companies who've done the analysis in our buildings for 6 months came back and said, wow, we're impressed because our buildings are averaging 75 years old and are still functioning to the level that they are. So shout out to our facilities team for managing our buildings as they have over the years. But there is a point at which a 75-year-old building is going to just cost us exponentially more and more each year, especially if we're operating more space than we need, that we have to address. So our FAC team is coming for, I think it's July 19th that we have a workshop, and that is, I don't even want to call it step 1 because it's really like step 30 in the process of our long-range facility planning. So that is continuing to move forward. And then we've also talked tonight about our hiring strategies. So not automatically posting a position when one opens over summer or late summer, but rather reviewing the need, especially with our charter school opening up, and where those are there staff shifts that have to happen, and do we need to post that position? So those are ongoing strategies that we're already taking into place, and we will have a whole budget workshop on our long-term planning going forward in the 21-22 fiscal year. And almost last but not least, we have our mill rate projections. So our mill rate continues to drop, and this is for a number of factors. One of them is that our revenue limit as a whole is dropping. And one of the reasons for that is because it increased so much last year because our enrollment declined at a higher rate than it had been. And then another is that our equalization rate is increasing. So as our communities get, I hate to use the word, but less property rich compared to the state average, which ultimately is what the equalization aid formula does, we get more aid, and then our tax levy goes down. So tax levy and equalization aid work like a seesaw. So when one goes up, the other goes down. And that's what we're seeing then with our mill rate. And then another factor is that home values are rising. As we know, the home market is kind of crazy. And so when the total equalized value of our homes go up, there's more value amongst which the tax levy can be split up. So we take our total tax levy divided by our total equalized assessed home value, and that's how we get our mill rate. So when the value of our homes keeps going up, our mill rate will continue to drop. So all of those factors is what is enabling our mill rate to continue to drop. And again, so right now we're projecting about a 50-cent decrease from current year, which is almost over a whole dollar less than just 2 years ago. And that graph really says a lot because we were at a steady rate-ish for the better part of a decade, and it really has dropped significantly in the last few years. And then I also just threw on the slide, what does this actually mean for a home owner? So basically we take the mill rate times 100 for each $100,000 of property value. So for somebody who owns a home that's about $100,000 of equalized value, not assessed, but equalized value, we multiply $8.21 by 100, and that's $821 is the school-based portion of the property tax payment, and so on. So anyone could do the math on what that might mean for their home. And then just one important note that even though a mill rate is decreasing, if somebody's value of their home has increased, there's some rate then where that breaks even, right? So like, even though the mill rate is decreasing, an individual's property tax payment might actually go up if your home value has increased at a higher rate. So we just have two final slides here. So this one is discussion recommendations, and then the next one is simply next steps. So we currently would be moving to approve our budget, our preliminary budget for 21-22 in the worst case scenario format, which is what we would be utilizing the current assumptions from the Joint Finance Committee budget proposal. And again, it's normal practice to approve a deficit budget, preliminary budget in June, and then we balance it by October. So any changes to the items that we talked through tonight that would that we want to bring forth for the June 24th budget? Look to the team.
Anything? So we're comfortable just going with what we have for the budget, with the deficit shown, with the understanding that it's a preliminary budget and lots of things still need to be understood and changed and determined before we can come to a final one?
Yep.
Beautiful. And then simply what's next. So we will continue to watch for state budget updates. In the relatively near future, we'll have our health insurance renewal, which could mean some potentially big dollars changing in our budget. We will continue to await federal guidance on ESSER 3. So this is one we didn't talk about tonight, but we have no actual guidance yet on ESSER 3 funding, and that is a significant allocation for us. So once we know more, we will work creatively and collaboratively to make a plan with staff input. So definitely an important part of our plan moving forward to gather staff input. So we'll, once we have more information on exactly what even ESSER 3 can be spent on, because we don't even have that guidance yet, we will work with us to gather staff input. And then finally, board approval of the preliminary budget will happen on June 24th. Is that the wrong date? Just 28th?
28th, yeah.
I was gonna say that's
28th.
like a Wednesday or something.
Yeah, it's a
I'm just gonna
Thursday.
change that right now.
The 21st is a Monday, so it's easy to make the.
On June 28th. And then at the same time, we'll approve committing the $4 million that we talked through at our current year budget amendment meeting, committing the $4 million of fund balance in the current year for retirement benefits. And that's all I've got. So any other questions? Hmm?
Were we given a date by the trust on when we could get our premium rate?
No. And our renewal is on a calendar year, so even if it comes in July, that's still, significantly before our renewal year.
Any other questions?
Just thank you for your hard work on this.
Yeah. Looking as good as it can look. All right, well, that will end our workshop. We will now take another 5-minute recess to end our recording, and we'll be going into our closed session meeting. Recess.